If we're gonna keep doing sequels to mid 2000 movies that nobody asked for, can I please get one to the other guys? I feel like I need to know what Gator and the Yankee Clipper are up to 20 years later. So The Devil Wears Prada 2 is the long-awaited sequel to The Devil Wears Prada, both being directed by David Frankel. And then again, we follow Anne Hathaway, Meryl Streep, Emily Blunt, and Stanley Tucci. We follow the same group of characters at Runway 20 years later as they're dealing with, the different world that we're living in 20 years later. The world of fashion has changed, technology has changed, everything is online. There's no more print. And that affects both Anne Hathaway's character, Andy Sachs, because in the first one we saw her go back to journalism. And that affects her a lot because nobody's really reading the newspaper anymore. Instead, everything's online. And then we see Miranda Priestley as she's still at Runway, still running it, you know, no one reads magazines anymore. So everything that she was doing 20 years ago, it kind of has to be different. Everything's online. The way she treated people before, we had a lot of movements that kind of went into how we treat people and how it shouldn't be how she was treating her employees back in 2006. So we have to see her kind of, you know, scaled back, not as Miranda as she was before. And, whether these characters continue forward in the world as it's changing or fall back, I think it's that would have made for a super interesting movie. And unfortunately, that's not really what we get. Um, to talk about the positives, I really like the performances. Miranda Priestley, that it that is Meryl Streep. Meryl Streep is Miranda Priestley. I think she goes down as one of the best villain roles in the last what 30 years. I may not look it, but I am a fan of the first Devil Wears Prada. I think it's a classic. I think it's a lightning in a bottle movie because I don't think it's been replicated since. That magic that we got on the screen with her and Anne Hathaway, we haven't gotten that, in another film. I think other films have tried and they failed. I like, the way they made New York feel like New York. I like the character progression of Andy Sachs, how we saw her as kind of like this doe-eyed fish out of water in this new world where she has to, face new moral conundrums and not just see the black and the white anymore, but now the gray, and how she comes out of it a better person. She knows what she wants, what she doesn't want, what she doesn't want to be, which is Miranda Priestley. I feel like where we leave that first one is Miranda Priestley's kind of a necessary evil for Runway and for the world of fashion. And that makes her a super interesting character. And I think it's a lot like, American Psycho and Christian Bale or Taxi Driver and Robert De Niro. These are our main characters, but they're not necessarily good people or, good guys. Instead, they fall into villain roles, and we see the world through their eyes. And in The Devil Wears Prada, we see why Runway and fashion need her. That being said, if she's going to continue to be that, I feel like she has to remain the mystery that she is, the enigma. Miranda Priestley felt like a force of nature, a force to be reckoned with. Like, we didn't see cracks in her foundation. We didn't really see the human behind, except for a couple of scenes. We were teased with there's an actual human being behind what she wants you to perceive. And here, I feel like we get more of that human. We get more cracks in the foundation. We see more of Miranda Priestley, the human being, but that's not necessarily a good thing because it feels like every negative character, trait that she had, it's still there. Like she's still selfish. Every move that she makes is still for her own benefit, not considering the people around her, like Nigel. I think, what she did at the end of the first one against him to keep him from getting his promotion and to keep her in her place. I thought that was, yeah, horrible. I know it made me feel for Nigel. I saw his story as a tragedy. He was the king's best guard. He was the right hand, and the king can't beat the king without him. And so he's kind of forced to be there because he wants to be at Runway, but he can't run it. So this is the best he's gonna do, and it's not what he deserves. He deserves more. But that's just he's okay with where he is because this is where he wants to be. And so I thought, 20 years later, we were going to see him get his flowers, get the praise that he deserves, and he doesn't really. He kind of gets a pat on the head ending where he ends the story is right where he started. And so going back to what I was saying about Miranda, her negative traits are still there. The selfishness is still there. Every move that she makes is for her benefit because she believes there is no runway without her. But now that we get this humanized version of Miranda, I don't empathize for the character. When something bad happens to her that may lead to her losing what she has, I'm not rooting for her to get it back or for her to keep it. I'm kind of like, good, you don't really deserve it. You kind of deserve what you're getting, and I'm not I'm not rooting for you. Anne Hathaway's Andy Sachs. Uh, I like that the character is in her mid 40s, female. She doesn't have any kids. She's single, unmarried. She's focused on her career, and she's happy. I think that breaks the mold in these rom-com type of movies where the female character, is made or broken by the status of her relationship, who she's with. And that's a tired cliche that needs to be thrown out now. It doesn't make for an interesting female character. What does is to see Anne Hathaway, who is good at what she does, put back into the world of Runway, now with this new look at life, this new expertise on journalism. She's the best in the game. Now she's back to where she started, and she's not really working for Miranda anymore. She's working with Miranda. So that change in the dynamic, that change in her character was super interesting to look at. But the negative of this movie is that it lacks the heart. The first one, I think it was a lightning in a bottle type of movie, and lightning doesn't strike twice. So in making this one, they had to have known that it wasn't going to be as good as the first one, and I think they tried to tell the best story they could. But in my opinion, that doesn't justify the making of the movie. Because why bring these characters back if it's not going to feel the same? It just feels like a Netflixified, yeah, Netflixified. I just made a new word. Netflixified version of the first movie. We get the same characters, the same world, but it doesn't feel the same. New York doesn't feel like New York anymore. It feels like any other city. There's still a focus on fashion, but we kind of trade in that for corporate drama. We're focused on revenue, we're focused on numbers, percentages, graphs, and, company against company rather than fashion. I feel like we're still getting interesting outfits through each character and fashion events, but there's just not that much of a focus on fashion and why it's so important, why it's so great. And I feel like that's something that was also missing. When I say the movie is Netflixified, what I also mean by that is just the lighting. The movie looks horrible. It doesn't look like the first one. The first one had its own original, you know, um, point of view. I don't know, like the lighting and cinematography. I haven't seen another movie like because that was its identity, and it loses that. Now it looks like any other Netflix movie out there. And even the offices at Runway look boring compared to how they used to look. Before they had style, they had gravitas. Now it looks like any other office building. Like when I worked in downtown LA as a paralegal, it looks like any other office I would walk through. And that's super disappointing. It feels like we stripped the first one of its identity, uh, kind of up the stakes and try to give the characters a brand new adventure, but doesn't make for a satisfying, you know, second part. It feels like an unnecessary continuation, which is the worst thing you can say about a sequel that comes 20 years later. It's unnecessary. And if I'm giving the option to watch this movie, I'm going to watch the first one instead. Yeah, no, and I can't say I recommend this one. I feel like if you're a diehard fan of the first one, you're going to like this one. Again, I'm not the target audience, but I really enjoyed the first one. But this isn't for me. But if you're going for the Miranda and the Andy of it all, then yeah, go for it. You might have a good time, but I can't say I recommend it. Pretty disappointing. I was really hoping to like this film, but it is what it is. But that's it for me. Thank you so much, and I'll see you next time.